Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the MIDDVantage series, Exploring Careers in the Green Economy. My name is Courtney Gant, and I'm in the class of 2022 at Middlebury College. At Middlebury, I'm a conservation biology major and a French minor. Today's episode is titled, Changing the Way People Use Energy, and I am pleased to be joined by Clayton Reed, class of 2008, who is currently a program director at ClearResult. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Clayton.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Courtney. Excited to be
So
here.
this series explores a number of different professional areas in the green economy, from policymakers and sustainability analysts to renewable energy and energy efficiency experts. So Clayton, thank you so much for being on. And can you just tell us a little bit more about what ClearResult does and how this company fits within the greater green economy?
Yeah, sure. So our company motto is we change the way people use energy. And so that's probably why the talk is titled that. We're essentially in a space that I would call demand side management. So we essentially control energy use at the demand side. So if you think about the grid as like full of all these generators and transmission lines that take the power from those generation sources to the customer, that's all sort of included in the supply side of the grid. And traditionally, a lot of utilities and the utility, regulatory environment really focuses on the supply side. And it wasn't until about 20 years ago that people really started focusing on the demand side of the equation. And there's been a lot of companies who've been in this space since earlier than 2000, but I would say that the industry really got kicked off and running in the 2000s. And so we're in that sort of demand side management space where we work with energy users from residential, small energy, residential customers, all the way up to large industrial customers to either save efficiency, make efficiency improvements in their building, do behavioral improvements. So where they might just turn down temperature at certain times of the day. So anything that we can do to sort of make the grid more resilient through controlling the demand side of the equation. So within that like larger space, ClearResult really operates in what we sort of call the program implementation space. So the utility environment is super complex. It's regulated. It's essentially a monopoly. So the government provides the utilities this monopoly space, and in sort of exchange, they heavily regulate the space to make sure that prices are fair for customers. And again, somewhere in the 2000s and a little bit earlier than that, government started to recognize that utilities were essentially being the way the structure worked out, they were incentivized to just increase energy use forever, because every time they added a new power plant or a new infrastructure piece, they could just rate base it and charge customers for it. So this is they basically force these utilities to have energy efficiency programs, and in many cases, especially early on, this space was pretty unique. It didn't really fit into the utility business model very well. So they started hiring third-party implementers to come in and help them design and execute these energy efficiency programs. So, ClearResult basically operates as a consultant that comes in and helps utilities meet their obligations, their regulatory obligations, to hit these energy efficiency targets every year. So, in a way, we're really just consultants. For the most part, we don't actually go in and install any equipment. Sometimes we go in and we do like screw in lights and we do some really minor improvements. But for the most part, we're going in and we're creating a market that is really efficient, and we're trying to connect customers with contractors who are actually installing the work. So that's kind of like where we play in the space, more or less.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting and definitely important that, this business is kind of booming in this past 2000 like time frame. And then could you kind of tell us a little bit more about like your current role at ClearResult? What are your main responsibilities and what entities do you interact with on a day-to-day basis?
Right. Yeah. So I am a program director. So I essentially manage like a portfolio of clients and programs, and I manage those programs more or less locally here in Colorado. I have a client, Excel Energy, that expands sort of beyond the state borders of Colorado. So, as a consulting company, we're very focused, we're very client focused. So for the most part, folks like me in the operations side of things are sort of tied to the client relationship. And, my job is really to execute on the contracts that we have with our clients. So most of the time, a client will come out with like an RFP, a request for proposal, and we'll respond. And if we win the work, we go through a contracting phase and we say, hey, we're going to deliver 1,000 energy audits to your customers. We're going to install this many light bulbs. And my job is to make sure that our team executes on the program goals and the obligations of that contract. So, we have almost 10 clients here in Colorado. We work mostly with utilities. And there are also some government entities. So here in Colorado, we work with the city and county of Boulder. They kind of have sustainability targets, and they have hired an implementer to help them hit some of those sustainability targets.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think it's always really exciting to hear about these cities that are kind of have these like green initiatives and are really making big strides in improving their infrastructure. And I was just wondering, kind of going off that, is there a favorite project you've had or something you've been involved with that really, brings you a lot of hope or kind of makes you feel like you kind of made a big, improvement in, the energy space in Colorado or elsewhere?
Yeah, I like to think, I wouldn't say like a specific project necessarily, or more like a general grouping of projects. I mean, I really like the fact that we're helping people every day, right? So like at the end of the day, it's a win-win kind of across the board. The utility is reducing operating costs on their systems. We get to add a benefit, like reduce costs for the specific customers that we work with. And my favorite programs are the ones where we can go in and make an immediate impact in someone's life, like day one, So there are programs, especially in the small business and residential and like low income programs, where we go in and we do an energy audit, we provide people a bunch of information, but then we also install some energy efficient light bulbs and other like really quick fixes. And, it's immediate impact that has, impacts their bottom line, helps them with their daily kind of business, or if they're in their home, it helps improve comfort in their home as well. So, I think that's kind of where I get most excited.
Yeah, no, definitely. And all really great areas to be working in for sure. And I was just wondering, something that I feel like we all kind of come up against resistance in, green initiatives and the green economy. There's always, other interests that kind of work against people in these spaces. And so I was wondering, what is the most challenging aspect of working at your company or working in the green economy? Do you ever come up against resistance to change, or do you think that people are pretty ready to accept new technologies and kind of, work on this, progress to, a more sustainable future?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's always friction, especially when you're talking about a regulated kind of government sort of environment. I think that's sort of the biggest struggle that we deal with on a regular basis, is that these utilities are sort of stuck in a heavily regulated bureaucratic system. So typically the way it works is these utilities will file rate cases, and they file energy efficiency rate cases basically. And those can sometimes range from 1 to 3 years typically. And, it can be hard to make changes to those programs mid-cycle. And there's a lot of interveners. So when they go in and they submit these rate cases, there's a public review process. And you would think that most of the public review would only be from folks like the Sierra Club, and there's all these sort of like obviously green and maybe left-leaning groups, but there's also this other side of it that's customer protection or advocate sort of groups that are more sort of conservative and potentially sort of right-wing leaning, that think that these programs are sort of charging customers extra money on their bills, and they'd rather this was being dealt with in a free and fair market, and not through a bureaucratic sort of process. So you sort of end up in this really interesting environment where it's really similar to the way our politics work in some ways. So that's always frustrating. It creates a lot of friction in what we can do, and so that's the downside. I think the upside is, I think we're all folks of us who are really excited about the climate policy and making a difference. Look at the national policy environment right now, and it's super frustrating, right? Like nothing seems to be happening. And the last 4 years of the Trump administration, I think were pretty frustrating for folks who really want clear action on climate change. And what's really exciting is what's happening at the state level. So I think this environment, while it can add friction, it actually adds a lot of potential for new pilots and new things to happen. So it's like a really good test bed for a lot of the stuff that could sort of roll out nationally eventually. And I think a good example of that is Xcel Energy is one of our clients. They were the first utility in the country to come out and say that they were going to be 100% carbon neutral by 2050. So that's something that they saw that their customers really wanted. And so that was something that they were able to do kind of at a local state level, and really sort of pushing the envelope from a climate perspective.
Yeah, no, definitely. And kind of moving along in that, feeling of the positives and kind of the upward trends that we're seeing. What do you see as the future of the energy efficiency field? And are there emerging technologies that you're really excited about, or you think are kind of on the horizon for the energy efficiency markets?
Yeah, this is one that I had to think about a bit. It's complex. Things are changing really fast right now. I think the biggest challenge we have sort of in my space specifically is baselines are shifting, and the lighting baseline shifting is a really big challenge for the energy efficiency like implementation and the utility program sector. And I think, it's a challenge because it's been the cheapest, most cost-effective way for utilities to hit their energy efficiency targets basically since the CFL light bulb became cost competitive with the incandescent. So, while that's a challenge, I think it also presents a really interesting opportunity for utilities to move beyond just lighting. The next layer of energy efficiency measures are going to be, less cost effective. They're going to be more expensive per unit of energy savings. So, it's going to be harder. Like, to use the classic analogy, it's like, we've sort of plucked a lot of the low-hanging fruit at this point. And, the other stuff is just going to be a little bit harder to get to. We're talking about things like installing new heating and cooling systems that cost customers, thousands of dollars versus, going to Home Depot and buying $100 worth of light bulbs. So that's kind of a challenge specifically for our sector. I think in a little bit more of a broad sense, we think about what just happened in Texas, right? And grid reliability is going to be the biggest topic, I think, for the next 10 years. And how that relates to what we do sort of in energy efficiency, or I should say demand side management, is time of use is going to be really critical. So as renewables come on the grid, and the time of day that renewables are sort of pushing energy on the grid, And when these sort of peak demand events happen, when you have like lots of cooling load in the middle of the summer, this kind of stuff is sort of going to become the norm. And as we try and like sunset a lot of these coal-fired power plants that are just sitting around waiting for those big events to happen, I think being able to control when people use energy and asking folks to turn their cooling down, or you're in Texas in the middle of a major cold snap, turning your heating down, controlling that demand side, in a more hourly, minute by minute kind of basis is, I think, the future of our industry, more so than just helping people install equipment in their homes.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think what's been happening in Texas is on all of our minds. I know I'm from the South too, and you're always kind of wondering, will we be next? So I think that's a really good point and something that definitely we can all start to think about. And so I just want to, say thank you again for these insights, and kind of moving a little bit more to talking about, your time at Middlebury. I'm curious about your own experience from campus to career. And at Middlebury, I saw that you majored in environmental economics. So I was just wondering if you could kind of talk about your time at Mid and how your college experience prepared you for this career.
Yeah, I was an environmental economics major, and I think economics is a really interesting framework to evaluate problems. And, I run into this daily in my job right now. So the way that utilities evaluate energy efficiency measures and whether they get implemented or not, the whole system is based on a cost benefit analysis. And they have somewhat complex structures for how that stuff works, but essentially you're talking about like, how much benefits are we getting divided by how much cost are we getting, and is the ratio above one? Are there net benefits or not? And so, for me, it was like, going to Middlebury, learning how to solve problems and learning like about that framework of economics as a framework for thinking about decision making really, I think, set me up well for my industry. And when I think about Middlebury, it's like you don't necessarily learn, outside of a couple, classes where you do learn sort of specific set of knowledge, and specific skills that you can go and actually do a job with those skills outside of Middlebury. For the most part, you're learning how to solve problems. You're learning how to learn. I think like when I came out of Middlebury, I was like, okay, I want to be in this space and I want to figure out everything I possibly can about this space. And I think Middlebury really gave me the confidence to go out there and research the energy space and research energy efficiency and really like get to know it really well.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's a really good point. Always going to be learning even after college. And then I'm wondering if there were specific courses or internships you were involved in, or, really kind of just speaking to what you think has been the most important in getting your first job.
Yeah, I mean, I was in school with a lot of the 350.org folks back in the day, Jamie Henn and some other of those guys. And we were lucky enough to kind of create a project for ourselves back in 2000, I don't know, 6 or 7 or something. And we created that carbon neutrality plan for the college, and it was really cool. I mean, we had this opportunity, 10 or 12 of us sort of created this report, and I got to focus on energy efficiency. So that kind of like created an opportunity for me to go to some, go to some companies and have that on my resume and be able to talk about how I had some sort of experience. So like, I think it is really important. I hate to say this, but it's really nice to have something on your resume that says that you even tangentially have some sort of idea of like what that company does already. So I think that really helped me get my first internship. After my junior year, I got an internship at a company that doesn't well, I think it still exists more or less. It's called Internoc, and they were really big in the early 2000s in the demand side management space. And I really do think that project on my resume helped me get in the door and helped me sort of talk about energy efficiency in that interview. And just grinding your way through those first couple years of getting experience where you really just don't have any, and I think I don't know if you're heading into this next question, but like, my biggest, I graduated in 2008. I guess I got a 6-month pass before the economy officially kind of collapsed and tanked. And it was a really, really hard time to graduate college. And a lot of what I think people wanted to do back in 2008 was to get into the renewable sector and the investment tax credit. Nobody was making any money, so they couldn't defer any taxes. So the investment tax credit as a vehicle for doing renewable energy projects basically evaporated overnight. So there's there weren't any jobs to be had. So I learned pretty early on that if you want to get a job after college, you really need to work the network. And getting to know people, the first job I got out of college was through a family friend. And the job that I got here at ClearResult was through a friend that I met through grad school. And I just I can't say enough about going out there and meeting people and networking and researching the companies that you think you want to go work for before you kind of go into those interviews.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice, because I know a lot of us now are concerned with all the job losses that have been due to the pandemic. And so coming out in a similar boat of being afraid that there aren't jobs is, always looking for ways to hopefully try to capitalize on what Middlebury College has gotten us. That's really great advice. And kind of, you kind of mentioned your time in grad school, but you did go to University of Colorado, Denver, and you got your master's in global energy management. So I'm just curious, why did you decide to go back to grad school, and what role do you think that advanced degrees have in your field?
Yeah, I think, I think there's a slice of people who it really makes sense to go and get an MBA. Especially if you want to be in consulting, management consulting, and those top tier MBA programs, they're really successful at getting you into those top tier consulting companies and that kind of stuff. And that's, that just wasn't really where I wanted to go with my career. So I didn't really see that as fitting into my pathway. And, I wanted to learn skills that were really specific to the energy industry. And I wanted to know more about how the energy industry worked. And this program was specific to the energy industry. It was a master's in business program specific to the energy industry. And, for me, it was like, I think it's really important also to spend some time in the work environment, to get an idea of what you want to be doing before you go back to school. And I'd spent enough time, in my actual job to understand that I liked being in management, that I sort of saw myself getting into the, managing teams and managing contracts and stuff like that. So I knew that I needed more of a skill set around how management works and how you make those decisions. And, I was really looking to learn specific skill sets that I think, Middlebury is just not really set up to teach you around human resources, strategic management, finance, accounting, all the kind of stuff that's just like you do in the real world when you run a business. And learning all those skill sets really helped me accelerate my career after that program. It also I was also able to do that program while working full time. So that was It was pretty cool from a career perspective. It was crushing from a personal perspective. I don't recommend it unless you're ready to like give up pretty much everything else in your life. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of us are thinking about grad school and trying to figure it out. So that's a really great kind of anecdote to help, a lot of people kind of find their way. And then kind of, looking at a larger picture, how do you see your career evolving from here? Would you like to stay in the energy efficiency space, or are there other areas of the green economy that you think would be interesting to explore?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just a really interesting environment. There's just like a lot going on. I am really curious to see what technology comes in. I think the smart home sector, sensors are becoming really, really cheap. And like I said, we're trying to figure out how to get people to reduce their energy at certain times of the day. And there's a lot of technology providers coming in now that are either installing technology or providing like the software interface that customers interact with to sort of make those decisions about whether they're going to adjust their energy use or not. And so those are really exciting places to be right now. I think it's a really, nascent industry. There's probably a lot of opportunity to get in early in those companies, and there's just a ton of growth in the next 10 years. So that's a space that's like really interesting to me. And then, believe it or not, I think it feels like solar and wind, are pretty mature. And in a lot of ways, they are mature in the sense that like the business model's been proven and the costs have come down a lot. But we're still at like 5 to 8% of the grid is using renewable energy. We have a totally insane amount of renewables to get installed between now and sort of 2050 if we're going to hit a lot of those renewable energy targets. So I think there's just going to be like explosive growth in the renewables sector, and there's some really exciting jobs in renewables as well, and that I think are a really good fit for Middlebury students kind of coming out of college. So
Yeah, no, that's really great to hear. And I think a lot of people are really excited about potential careers in the green economy. So I just want to thank you again for sharing your story. And kind of as we wrap up here, if you have any other, tips for students, you've had a lot of experience in the industry. And so really, are there just any things that you feel would best prepare students for entry points into this career field?
yeah, I think my biggest recommendation is to understand that sometimes you got to start at the bottom, and it's a long grind. For me, it was, there was a lot of crawling around in attics and installing light bulbs when I first had my first job, and I think taking pride in the fact that it's okay to like do some of those entry level jobs and grind it out for a few years. I look back on my career and where I am now, and being able to speak directly to what it's like to be out in the field and to know what that's all about, is a super valuable experience for me, kind of being at an upper level management position, to understand how things really work at the ground level. So, take advantage of those entry level positions, learn as much as you possibly can in the beginning. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty or do something that, maybe feels like it's beneath you. I think it's really important to spend some time, grind it out, understand that like hard work's going to pay off in the end.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Clayton, again, for your engagement and for helping all of us students prepare for our career destinations.
All right. Thanks, Courtney.
Yeah, so this concludes this episode within the series Exploring Careers in the Green Economy. In closing, I want to encourage viewers to tune in to get career advice from a number of professionals and a broad variety of organizations in our other episodes in this series. I also want to encourage you to tune in to the other MIDDVantage series, which can be accessed through the Events and Programs tab on the CCI website. Thank you again for watching.